Good morning.
Morning.
I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you all so much for being here to talk about perhaps one of the most important topics that humans could ever talk about, and that is our children. I want to thank everybody for being here because today we're here to talk about the advocacy for juvenile justice reforms and demand juvenile justice reforms in the United States of America so that we could be the example that the world looks to when it comes to how we treat our children. We're here today to send a clear and loud message that our children do not belong in jails. Our children belong in classrooms, in after-school programs, on playgrounds, with their families, not behind bars taken away from what should be the nurturing environment that every human child deserves to have and needs. We know that locking up children does not reduce crime. It only exacerbates it. Youth incarceration has the opposite effect that people think it should have. But yet the United States invests more in keeping children in prison than any other industrialized nation in the world. In 2019, almost 700,000 youth under the age of 18 were arrested in the United States of America. 67% of those children were children of color. I'll say that again. 67% of those children were children of color, black and brown children, when they make up less than 50% of the children in our country. While incarcerated children are often provided with inadequate education, inadequate instruction, no nurturing, they lack health care, they lack counseling, and services that should be administered to children who have fallen into a situation where they may have done something silly or simply wrong. Psychological abuse, sexual abuse, assault, and suicide happens more when children are behind bars than in any other place that they could be. For far too long, we have relied on juvenile justice models that prioritizes wasteful incarceration over efficient, effective rehabilitation. Our children are our future, but make no mistake about it, our children are our responsibility at this very moment. We owe them every opportunity to live productive and fulfilling lives. Growing in Pacoima myself, on that side of town, the bad side of town supposedly, I witnessed how our broken criminal justice system kept neighborhood kids in a perpetual cycle of incarceration and labels that did not allow them, even as adults, to participate in society. I saw how systemic problems literally ruined the lives of children for generations. We all make mistakes when we're young, but those mistakes should not determine our entire future. Earlier this year, I led the Second Chance for Justice legislation package with Congresswoman Karen Bass and Senator Cory Booker because we believe that our children deserve to live in a world where they can change for the better and where their future is not defined by one simple, single mistake that likely every person has made, white, black, brown, or otherwise, sometime when they were children. The Second Chance for Justice package furthers evidence-based prevention intervention initiatives to intervene in the lives of young people. We know that intervention and prevention have much better outcomes than the traditional suppression model of law enforcement. And by the way, I must remind every single one of us, taxpayers, when you believe that tough on crime is doing well for improving our communities, you're mistaken. You've been misled. When you believe that your tax dollars going to fund the incarceration of a child for upwards of $150,000 to over $200,000 a year versus rehabilitating them for as little as $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000, those are the facts, ladies and gentlemen. We have been stuck on stupid in America with your tax dollars, and we have been hurting our children in our communities. And by being a law enforcement solution for our children, we have been only exacerbating everything and doing the opposite of what our intention is. Don't take my word for it. Listen to the advocates that you're about to hear from today, who work with our children across America every single day to nurture them, to love them, to care for them, and to bring them into being the human beings and the productive citizens that they already are. Smart youth justice alternatives make our communities safer and are just the right way to invest in our youth. It's just the right way to reduce crime and reduce expenses to the taxpayers. That's what we're fighting for today. Our bipartisan resolution with Representatives David Trone and Victoria Spartz to designate October 2021 as National Youth Justice Action Month aims to shine a light on the systemic problems in our juvenile justice system and lead us to fix those same problems with legislation we have introduced with Congresswoman Karen Bass and Senator Cory Booker. I thank President Biden for issuing his proclamation to recognize this month as National Youth Justice Action Month, and I look forward to working with his administration to create a justice system that provides second chances and opportunities for all children across this great country, because we owe our system and our children to do what works and what is best for them. That's what we're fighting for today. We owe our children a system that works for all of us and that puts our children first. And with that, I'd like to give an opportunity for Allison Clements to come up to the podium and explain all the wonderful things that she is doing every day in her organization and the America that we dream to have for today and forever. Allison.
Thank you all for being here today, and a special thank you to Representative Cárdenas for being a champion for children and for recognizing October as Youth Justice Action Month. I also want to acknowledge those who are activists behind us who are formerly incarcerated, who have joined us today to stand here for change and to use their voice to really create real policies that help children. During Youth Justice Action Month, we as a nation reflect on our treatment of children who come into contact with the legal system. The past decade has seen incredible progress with a 70% drop in the number of youth who are charged as adults and dramatically fewer kids in adult custody. Yet our system is far from just. We don't have to look far to see how our system is failing young people. The recent news story detailing Black girls in 3rd and 4th grade who were arrested just for seeing a school skirmish underscores just how broken our justice system is. Our current system sees children and views them as dangerous, particularly Black and brown youth, those who are just learning to read. It's unconscionable, and we demand change. Those girls deserve better, and our nation's children deserve better. Children need compassion, not courts, care, not cages, and families, not facilities. If we are truly to protect childhood, we must create clear barriers to prevent children from needlessly getting caught in our nation's courts. Despite an internationally recommended minimum age of prosecution of 14 years old, the federal government and 28 states in the United States have no minimum age of juvenile court jurisdiction, meaning children as young as 3 or 4 can be arrested and pushed into a court system. Momentum is growing across the country to establish a reasonable minimum age. Just this year alone, 12 states introduced legislation to establish minimum ages that would keep young people out of the justice system altogether. We're pleased that Congress has introduced legislation to begin to deconstruct the youth legal system and implement common sense, science-backed policies that treat children as children. Representative Bass's Childhood Offenders Rehabilitation and Safety Act is the first step towards orienting our youth legal system to acknowledge that children are not tiny adults. The legislation aims to connect youth exposed to trauma to needed supports and services by establishing a minimum age of federal youth jurisdiction at 12 years old and creating a block grant program to connect youth in child-serving systems to support services. In honor of Youth Justice Action Month, we compel Congress to do just that. We compel them to act in the best interest of our nation's children and public safety by swiftly passing this youth justice legislation. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Marcy Mistrett, with the Sentencing Project.
Thanks, Allison. Good morning, everybody. My name is Marcy Mistret, and I'm here from the Sentencing Project. I'm their Youth Justice Director, and I'm also the co-chair for the Act for JJ Coalition. Today we're here to honor Youth Justice Action Month. And Youth Justice Action Month began in 2008 by a mother in Missouri, Tracy McClard, whose 17-year-old son died by suicide in an adult jail. Tracy didn't know that all 17-year-olds in Missouri were treated as adults when they are charged with any crime. She wanted to make sure that she was the last parent to suffer this injustice and this pain, and so she launched YJAM. Today, we are here to take YJAM to a whole other level. The movement that Tracy started is still building. While every single state in this country still charges children as adults, this includes children as young as 10, we have been able to drop the number of children in the adult system by more than 80% over the past decade. Despite that progress, still, 1 in every 13 children that are arrested are charged as adults in this country. What this package does, under Ms. Bass's bill, is to end the direct filing of children that are into the adult court at the federal level. It requires due process steps, important steps, that includes ensuring that children get a hearing in front of a judge to look at the broader scope of facts that might surround their charges other than what is gathered at the very initial point of a police investigation. It also puts up other guardrails, protecting our youngest children from being transferred, recognizing that the youth justice system is created to tend to these children. And finally, and very importantly, it removes felony murder from eligible charges for children. It requires the courts instead to consider consequences in alignment with the actual behavior of children. This is important in treating children like children. I want to be clear, there's nothing in this bill that ends the treatment of children as if they're adults at the federal system. But it does recognize that children should get some due process steps to ensure that the protections of childhood are kept, except for in very extraordinary circumstances. The federal government is not alone in suggesting these changes. In fact, before the 1990s, this was general practice across the United States. And recognizing that extreme sentencing, automatic filing in adult court, and placement in children in adult jails and prisons actually decreases public safety and causes great injury to children. Children, I will note, 9 out of every 10 of whom are Black, brown, and tribal youth. This is not justice. At the state level, we've seen half of the states roll back or eliminate these automatic transfer laws in the past decade. It's time for the federal government to follow suit, so no more mothers lose their children in the horrors of adult incarceration. I want to close by thanking Mr. Cárdenas, Ms. Bass, and Mr. Westerman for their introduction of this bill of packages, and our allies in the Senate, Mr. Durbin and Mr. Booker, who are supporting the First Step Act, Mr. Murphy, who's fighting hard to get allocations to close youth prisons, and Mr. Whitehouse, who also has passed a resolution in support of YJAM, and Mr. Grassley. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to turn this over now to my friend Michael Mendoza from the Anti-Recidivism Coalition.
My name is Michael Mendoza, and I'm the Director of National Advocacy with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition in California. I want to thank Congress members Tony Cárdenas, Karen Bass, Bruce Westerman, and David Trone, and their staff for their leadership and dedication in ensuring that we treat kids like kids when in conflict with the law. Last month, Biden declared October as Youth Justice Action Month, declaring in his proclamation that children have the capacity to carry the possibilities of our country. Possibilities that one day we can behold the glory of a child's full potential blossom with the love that this world desperately needs. Which is why we at ARC are proud to stand here with our partners across the country, from both sides of the aisle, working together to support this bipartisan effort that both sides can claim as victories for our children that need more than ever. Miranda Rights for Kids recognizes and upholds the differences between children and adults. This law would ensure that children have the same constitutional protections adults do when deciding to give up their rights. Children in positions to have their Miranda rights violated are uniquely vulnerable and often come from underserved communities. The vast majority of them are victims themselves. And when faced with police interrogation, operate out of fear as opposed to a full comprehension of the law. This law is integral to reforming our justice system into one that values protecting our children. These policies would provide hope, and the kind of hope that saves lives. We know because many of us at ARC were those kids that grew up serving life sentences in adult prisons for crimes that we committed as children. We were held accountable for our decisions, but convicted under the full force of adult punishment without regard for our youthfulness. Fortunately, since then, America has also grown and matured, while recognizing the harm children have faced in systems built for adults. Many states have reversed course to stand in the gap for children by changing their laws and providing hope instead of hopelessness. Smart policy changes saved our lives, and we can do the same in Congress by passing these reforms that will make our community safer and bring families together as children and young people are given opportunities and the possibilities of redemption. If America's young people are the kite strings that hold our national ambitions aloft, then we must be the wind that helps them set sail. I urge Congress, Democrats and Republicans, to support these public safety reforms, bring families together with their lost children. And with that, I want to introduce my dear friend, my colleague and esteemed member of our board, Jerome Dixon.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you, Congressman Cárdenas, for introducing this important bill. 31 years ago, when I was a 17-year-old high school junior, I was picked up by law enforcement for a murder robbery that I did not commit. I was alone, confused, and scared. They read me my Miranda rights as a kid, but I didn't know what that meant. What it meant to waive them, or that by answering a single question from the officers that I was giving those rights up. For the next 25 hours, I was interrogated by the law enforcement using tactics reserved for adults. I kept thinking about my mom, who didn't know where I was at, who probably was worried sick. At the 25th hour, I caved into the authorities' demands by telling them what they wanted to hear, which was a false confession. I didn't get to go home that night. In fact, I went home 21 and a half years later. When I was released from prison, the California Parole Board, on record, acknowledged my innocence by saying, "We're sorry that it took us 20-some years to recognize that you were in here for something that you didn't do." And they set me free. This week, I celebrate 10 years of being home free. I am a happy man. I am a board member with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. I married the love of my life a few months ago. We purchased our first home in Los Angeles. I have a beautiful dog. His name is Wilson, who has learned how to sleep with a blanket. But it's been rough. It has been rough missing all the things that I should have had when I was locked up, like my high school graduation, the prom I never had, the first girlfriend I never had, my mom taking me to a college dorm and giving me all the necessities that she knew that I would need as I'm embarking on this new journey. Trying to find the love of my life and understanding the raw emotions of puppy love. None of that happened. It was all bottled up. I don't want what happened to me to happen to any other child. And this does happen all the time. In a study of exoneration, it was found that 13% of adults give false confessions in comparison to 42% of youths. That's because children are different from adults. As a society, we recognize that they cannot drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, consent with relations with adults. So how can they consent to waiving their rights without parents knowing where they are, without understanding what their rights are, how to waive and maintain them, and what that means to do so? No child should be left to serve a life sentence for false confession. No child should be punished with a life sentence for not being able to comprehend Miranda rights. And yet it has happened, and it will happen until we change the law. My name is Jerome Dixon, and we have to treat kids like kids and protect their civil rights at all costs. Thank you. Also, I would like to introduce Marshawn Allen.
Good morning. I thank you all for being here, and thank Congressman Cárdenas for being here as well. My name is Marshawn Allen. I am the National Policy Director at Represent Justice. I am also a member of the Incarcerated Children Advocacy Network. I grew up on the southeast side of Chicago, a neighborhood that was plagued by gangs, drugs, and poverty. In March 1992, when I was 15 years old, a series of events unfolded that changed my life forever. Over a period of 6 days, I was held at gunpoint, kidnapped, ordered to steal a car, and was a witness to a double homicide. About 2 weeks later, I was charged as an adult with several offenses, including 2 counts of felony murder. Although it was undisputed that I was not immediately present when the death occurred, that I did not hurt or kill anyone, that I did not plan to hurt or kill anyone, and that I did not handle or possess any weapons, I was found guilty and sentenced to 2 mandatory terms of life without parole. I ultimately served almost 25 years in prison before I was released in 2016 after the United States Supreme Court declared mandatory life without parole sentences for children unconstitutional. Had it been up to my home state, Illinois, I would still be incarcerated today. This brings me to the point I'd like to make sure I leave you with today, that over time, our state and federal governments have enacted laws and policies that have that has a desperate impact on children of color and do not account for our humanity or dignity as individuals. We have created and perpetuated a system that strips away circumstances, backgrounds, and futures, all in exchange for a false promise of safety. Because of the felony murder rule, I am forever labeled a so-called violent offender, even though I've never personally committed any acts of violence. I am branded a murderer, even though I've never harmed or intended to harm anyone. This is not just or fair, and it does not make our community safe. The felony murder rule, as it is applied to children, is particularly unfair and unjust because it holds people like me legally accountable for deaths that we did not only commit, but also for death we did not plan, intend, or know would occur. Moreover, 25% of children sentenced to life without parole were also, like me, convicted under the felony murder rule. It makes absolutely no sense to convict and sentence children in this way. It is unconscionable to treat and hold children accountable according to the same standards as adults. I am not advocating for no accountability for children who cause harm. What I am advocating for is for a closer look at the range of policies that prevent kids from being seen as growing, changing human beings. Our policies are out of line with international standards that are based upon basic principles of human rights. Over the coming days and weeks, Congress will debate whether to enact sensible legislation that will reform the federal juvenile justice system. I hope that they will consider my story and the stories of the thousands of others who were tried as adults and were given extremely long sentences for crime committed as children as they do so. More importantly, I hope that they vote on the right side of history by treating kids like kids. Thank you. And now I would like to take the time to introduce my colleague and friend, Ellie Ellis.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eddie Ellis, and I work for the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. I was given an extreme sentence as a 16-year-old here in Washington, D.C. in 1991. I've now been out for 15 years now, and I'm a living proof that change is possible. There are thousands of people like me who have taken full responsibility for their actions and is working to make change and create change in their communities, and who are now home and are leaders in their communities. Many of them are with me today, standing behind me, from Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Maryland, California. I work with people getting out of prison who went in as kids across the country, and I can tell you that people given a fair chance with life, they can show why these bills are very important and that change is definitely possible. Because people were given extreme sentences when they were adults, this legislation would simply give, let me backtrack. There's so much human potential that is stuck behind bars who were sentenced to extreme sentences as children. There's so much opportunity for these people if they're given a chance to have a review and the opportunity to come home and be with their family and the community. It is important to emphasize that states all over the country, and my home, the District of Columbia, have already banned life without parole for children. As of today, 25 states banned the practice of sentencing children to prison without the possibility of parole. And that number is rising every day. States as diverse as Utah, Arkansas, Maryland, and Virginia have banned the practice of sentencing children to die in prison. And America, my country, is the only country in the world to allow this practice. It is past time to end this practice at the federal level, and this legislation gives us a chance to do this. I was sentenced in 1991 as a 16-year-old child. I spent 15 years in prison, and 6 of those years was done in the Federal Bureau of Prisons in ADX Supermax. And I'm a living example that change is possible. 15 years that I've been home. I'm a husband, I'm a father, and I've given half of my life since I've been home to change. And the only thing we're asking is give people an opportunity and a review to prove that they deserve to be home. Thank you. And I want to introduce James Doe, Human Rights for Kids.
Good morning. I want to start off my remarks. I'm James Dold with Human Rights for Kids. I want to start off my remarks first by thanking Congressman Cárdenas for his leadership in introducing this package. Congressman Westerman's office, who is represented here today, who comes from the 4th Congressional District in Arkansas, who is championing legislation to end life without parole sentences for children and scale back the application of mandatory minimums for children. Congresswoman Karen Bass's office, who has introduced the Childhood Offenders Rehabilitation Act, which will reform the antiquated way in which we allow children to be sentenced and tried in adult courts in the first place. And Senator Durbin and Senator Grassley's office, who are championing similar legislation as Mr. Westerman over on the Senate side. Before I dive too much into my remarks, I just want to do a real quick acknowledgement of all of the folks who've showed up today who were formerly incarcerated. If I can, for folks who are formerly incarcerated, can you please raise your hands? Of those who are formerly incarcerated, yes. Of those who are formerly incarcerated, how many of you were tried as adults? How many of you received mandatory minimums? How many of you were sentenced to life imprisonment, life with or without the possibility of parole? What we're looking at here, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the largest government-sanctioned human rights abuses against children in the world today. It is a human rights abuse to arrest 5- and 6-year-old children like they recently did in Tennessee. It happens all over the country every single day in America. It is a human rights violation to try 17- and 16-year-olds as adults and exclude them completely from the jurisdiction of the juvenile court system like they do in Texas, Georgia, and Wisconsin. It is a human rights violation to sentence children by the same standards that we use for adults. It is a human rights violation to use solitary confinement on children. How many folks here were in solitary confinement during your incarceration? These are all human rights violations that are sanctioned under U.S. law. They are prohibited by the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which every single nation state in the entire world is a party to, except the United States. In 2018, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights released a scathing report rebuking the U.S.'s treatment of children in the justice system. We cannot be a beacon for human rights in the world if we are engaged in what is the largest government-sanctioned human rights violation against children. It is vital that this Congress prioritize children in criminal justice reform conversations. Kids have to be the first and last priority when we're talking about any single issue in this country, and that is especially true when we're talking about children who come into conflict with the law, which, by the way, when we look at all of these children and how they end up in the legal system to begin with, the overwhelming majority of them were victims of crime. Congressman Westerman's bill is named after a young woman by the name of Sarah. Sarah was a child sex trafficking victim who killed a man who had groomed her, raped her, and forced her into prostitution for years before she killed him. I'm sure folks have heard the stories of numerous young girls in Tennessee, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Texas, California, all child sex trafficking victims who got the exact same punishment for committing a crime or an act of violence against a person who had raped and abused them. In what world does that make sense? We're talking about life imprisonment for child sex trafficking victims. If you care about child victims of physical abuse, if you care about child victims of sex trafficking or kids who've been neglected, if you care and are trying to fight against that scourge, you have to care about the kids in our criminal legal system. Because that's where they end up when every other system fails them. Instead of wrapping our arms around them and embracing them, giving them a hug and telling them that we love them and that we're going to protect them and we're going to get the treatment and services that they deserve, we do this. We send them home, we send them into a cage where they age for years on end, come out midlife, and struggle to put the pieces back together. We have to stop doing this to children. It's time that we stand up as a nation and declare with one voice that kids are different and we need to treat them differently in the legal system. And we have the examples from bipartisan states like Arkansas and California. I'll tell you, if Arkansas and California can pass these sorts of reforms, there's no reason that Congress can't do it. There is still bipartisanship. We have to prove that the system still works, and there's no better opportunity, no better way to do that than reforming the way that the legal system treats children. Thank you all so much for being here. At this time, we're going to go ahead and open it up for any questions from the press. Thank you.
Any questions? Any questions for any of the individuals who spoke? Anybody wonder why we're here? No, just kidding. Look, I just wanted to, since there don't appear to be any questions, I know we have some press on virtual, but I just want to give one bit of advice to any newlyweds. You're on the most beautiful, amazing journey of your life, and the best advice I can give you is just learn how to take a deep breath and say yes. And it's going to be amazing. I've been married for 29 years, and it has been a beautiful, amazing journey for me. And I just want to say that I've been an elected official for 25 years. Juvenile justice is an issue that pains my heart, that we've made some progress, but as you heard today, we still have a long way to go in supposedly the greatest nation on the planet. And in some ways we are, but when it comes to this, as was mentioned, we're the only nation in the country that dares to sentence a child to life in prison. The only one. We need to change that. We need to change that. We need to demand that. And that's what we're doing here today. We're the only country on the planet that will confine a child to solitary confinement and punish them in that way, which is the worst thing that you could do to the brain and the heart of a child or an adult. And we're the only country that allows ourselves to do that. We're demanding here today that we create justice in our laws so that our children can live, so that our children can actually be free to be who they are. Beautiful, amazing human beings, not seen as less than anything than that. So I want to thank all of you for being here today. I want to thank every single practitioner out there in the streets of America who joined us today and all of your organizations. I want to thank you for giving the love and commitment and the truth to our children in every way that you can. Now we need to do it with our laws so that everyone can recognize that writ large, and we can be the greatest nation on the planet once we handle and take care of our laws so that our children are treated justly and fairly as children should be treated. Thank you all very, very much.